Jared, thanks so much for joining us today. Excited to have you and tell your SMU story. If you would, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, thanks for having me. Jared Pope from Granbury, Texas, just southwest of Fort Worth, and currently CEO and founder of WorkShield, but graduated from SMU Law School in 2004, but happy to be here.
Yes, we're this will be an exciting one to talk through. As you mentioned before, a different career path for a typical SMU law student,
Mhm.
and excited to get into that. But always starting from where you began. You went TCU undergrad, so we won't hold that against you. You found your way to the
Thank you.
hilltop. But you mentioned you had a twin brother who did go to SMU. What was the choice? And it sounds like that was a real opportunity or a real thought process for you of where you might go to school. How did you land on TCU for undergrad?
Well, first off, with my twin brother, having him and sharing a room with him for 18 years, you kind of get tired of each other. And so at some point, you're like, I need to break off and go become myself. And so that was kind of part of it. But the other side of it was I actually ran track and field for TCU and cross country. And so they had a really good running program. So did SMU. I was actually recruited by Clemson and TCU. And so just decided, hey, I'm going to go run at TCU. At the time, it was a little bit closer to home,
Yeah.
although I realized I didn't need home that much. But so it was really more of, hey, my twins at SMU, I'm at TCU. If we play our cards right, we can probably go to each other's college and go
Hmm.
party and have a lot of
Yeah.
fun. And
Total
it
agree.
became true. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's
So,
right.
so a student athlete at TCU, were you always knowing that law school was kind of the path for you, or kind of walk us through maybe that condensed version of deciding to go to law school and kind of the career options for you in undergrad?
Yeah, I think the idea of law school happened probably when I was early on. It was really around my 13th birthday, and so drunk driver hit us, headed home from Benbrook, head to
Mm.
Granbury. It was my twin brother and my mom, and the insurance company lied about him, the driver, having actually insurance, and so it kind of obviously pissed me off.
Wow.
And so at that point, I said, okay, well, how do we hold people accountable? Like this is, a 13-year-old kind of thinking about
Yeah.
this. And I said, I'm going to go to law school. And then it kind of never changed. And I always just kind of knew I liked business, but I also wanted to be a lawyer because, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. And so I knew lawyers were always having nice lifestyles
Yeah.
and they always drove the fancy cars and looked really good and ate at all the cool restaurants.
Okay.
And so, and seemed to be happy. And so I just said, I'm going to go to law school. And
That's amazing.
at that point, just went through TCU, really just kind of, TCU is a stepping stone to get to law school.
Did you find that instance at age 13 really continue to kind of be a theme in your life of deciding, hey, this will be kind of what I want to do in practice as I get into law?
Yeah, it's different now, right?
Yeah.
At 47, but at 13, definitely as I went to TCU, I was like, all right, I'm going to go to law school. I'm going to be that big firm partner.
Hmm.
And I had this grand idea, like, this is what I was going to do, right? But at the same time, I also knew, like, I loved business and I love selling. I used to sell books door to door for 3 summers with a company called the Southwestern Company while I was at TCU. And that was always fun, made a ton of money.
Hmm.
But I just said, well, probably should just go to law school.
Yeah.
And, so I just said, okay, let's go do it.
And so, what was your vision of law school? What you thought it would be like? Did you know you wanted to stay in Texas, and that's kind of where SMU popped up? And then also, as you get into school, how different was law school than what maybe you had thought it would be like when once you started?
Well, I think we all watch the movies and know that we're probably going to be called upon. We
Mhm.
have to read a ton, which I'm not the greatest reader, although I don't mind it. The vision of law school was being this kind of intellectually smart, having discussions about and contracts and everything else, and having this kind of collaboration with your fellow classmates. And then when I got there, it was just like, God, everyone's so smart. I was almost questioning
Yeah.
myself, like, do I belong here? Like, what's happening? But I did want to be in Dallas, and being at SMU, it was one of the premier law schools. Obviously my twin brother had just graduated from there. I have a
Mhm.
family history of SMU, and so wanted to be in Dallas. And quite honestly, my twin and I had became best friends when he was at SMU. I was at TCU, and I said, what better place than to hang out with your best friend, go to law school, be in the same city?" And Dallas was thriving, so it was a really good place to be.
And did you go into school having a thought on what type of law you were gonna practice, or how did that kind of shape and change over the course of your law school career?
I really enjoyed contracts with Professor Crespi, and just I think everybody loved that class, and so enjoyed that. And so I always thought, okay, I'm going to go do corporate law. I just thought that was the big thing. Wasn't really into litigation because I figured there's too many deadlines to figure out, and knowing me, I'm probably going to miss them anyways, and so then it's not going to be good. Um, but kind of all of that changed a little bit when I took my first 2L class, which was income tax. And so with Professor Hanna. And I always kind of, the way I visioned income tax was like, oh, this is fun. But the moment I started learning from Professor Hanna, it's like those movies where everything just kind of lines up and it's all in space and you're kind of lining everything up and then you could see pathway through. That literally kinda happened when I started learning about the tax code, and I'm like, "Oh, it's just a treasure hunt. That's all it is." And so it became really easy for me to learn about income tax and then corporate tax and then partnership tax and, Amgen partnership tax, there and, which I think is probably next to securities regs, probably one of the hardest, cases or classes to take, but I don't know, I just fell in love with tax, and Professor Hanna was like, "Oh, you ought to go get an LLM," which we'll get to that in a second,
Yeah.
and so I was like, "Oh, this is kinda neat, maybe I'll be a tax partner," although all my friends were telling me, "Jared, you're too social to be a tax partner." So,
So what was the conflict there? You thought tax, you found this topic that you really enjoyed. I think that's probably a key part of being an attorney, right? Find something that you're passionate about and willing to dig in pretty deep and be kind of the best in your industry. But maybe peers were saying, hey, you're better served being, speaking to clients. You mentioned your business interests, your ability to like to sell. What was kind of that crossroads that ultimately, and you can kind of go a little bit into leaving then law school and kind of the
yeah,
maybe career and macro dynamics of impact the
yeah.
ability to do exactly what you want to do, right?
Yeah, so a couple of things were competing against each other, and so, I really like tax, and if you think about generally most tax lawyers, they're kind of A, B, C, D,
Hmm.
E,
Hmm.
it's just they're not necessarily social people per
Yep.
se. They're not the liveliest person in a room, but I was one to always kind of be the one that was at a party, talking with people. I could talk to anybody. And so they're like, Jared, this may not be the right path for you. And I said, look, if I'm a tax partner and I can actually sell
Right.
and talk more than the other person, I'm sure I'm going to have a bigger book than anybody else.
Right.
And so I just kept pushing back. And now from there, let's also remember I wasn't the smartest kid in the school, right? Every semester I would get like A's, B plus, A minus,
Yeah.
A plus, and then I'd get like a B minus or I'd get a C plus. And I'm like, damn, like this is not good. I can't make the law review. I
Right.
couldn't get onto here. And
And
so,
that this might be a
eh,
good point to point out how competitive and how much the rankings matter in law school, right? For those listening who maybe are
yeah,
considering or about to go into law school, how does that what is that dynamic like within the
well, it's
cohort
hard.
and your
Uh,
needs, right?
Yeah, it's hard because that's what everybody wants, and then you get your internship after your first year if you're in the top of the class. After your second year, you get that big internship at the big firm, but you gotta be in a very good position in the top third,
Mhm.
generally speaking. I wasn't in the top third,
Yeah.
and I wasn't on a law review, which made it even worse, and so it's really, really hard from there, and if you're going to go into law school, you have to basically say, "Listen." Are you gonna do everything you can to be in the top third, top 10, top 25%, whatever the case is,
Mhm.
or are you gonna take a different approach or whatever the case is? Now, that didn't stop me from getting internships.
Right.
I had an internship at Lincoln Property Company after my first year, and then my second year, I did an internship with a smaller firm, and I had an externship with American Airlines. So, it's all out there. It's just the grandiose idea of I'm gonna be this tax partner at this big firm.
Yeah.
I didn't even have an internship at a big firm. So it was a little like, I gotta figure out something else to do.
And so what was that? What did you decide that you had to figure out to do?
Well, I said, "Well, if I can't do it, what's my best way in?" And at that point, because I love tax so much, Professor Hanna said, "Hey, why don't you go get an LLM in tax? There's 3 main schools you can go to: University of Florida, Georgetown, or NYU." And so got into Florida,
Mm,
Georgetown, waitlisted at NYU. And this was you're applying, you may or may not get in, you kinda know when you're gonna get in, and you get that information all while after graduating law school, you're taking the bar. And
mhm,
so studied for the bar, took the bar, and there's this kinda dead period. And at that point, I realized, "Okay, well, wait, I still need to get in. I wanna go in." I kinda got my acceptance. I was dating this girl at the time named Jennifer, who's now my wife, and she was like, "Look, you're kind of in debt, right? You got law school debt.
mhm.
You need to go get another $100,000 debt, education." And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. And I also said, listen, I knew if I probably left, it wasn't going to work out because I think she was just kind of like long distance relationships don't work, and absence does not make the heart grow fonder with her. And so, so I said, okay, got it. And I went, and because I didn't have a job at the time, I actually recruited students to go to law school while I was waiting for the bar results. And so started in New York. I was for SMU law school, started in New York, traveled all the way to California in different fairs at different schools, and probably had one of the best times of my life
Yeah,
of literally no responsibility, getting paid a pretty good amount of money to travel and have everything paid
yeah.
for 3 months.
So
And so
what was the pitch then for you to tell students to go to SMU Law School? And then what would your pitch be now given what your career has been to be the pitch to go to SMU Law School?
My pitch to them was very simple. It's in a community that's based with a lot of companies, a lot of business, and a huge network
Mhm,
of alumni. And so, if you want that to be able to succeed, whether it's being a lawyer or going to law school to change the way you're thinking, SMU is a great way because it's got a business school, it's got a law school. You could do multiple things together, and you can be involved in the community. That pitch today is no different, or then is no different than what it is today. Now, I will say today, I probably couldn't get in
mhm,
to the law school today because it's very hard to get in,
mhm,
given it's risen up in the ranks, and there's a lot of smart kids coming in and adults coming to law school. And the same pitch is again, it's a great community, it's a good business area, it's a good legal environment. And if you don't want to be a lawyer, it's a great way to change the way you think
mhm.
about different problems so you can apply it to the business community or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that book because I feel like a lot of people feel this pressure, and correct me where I'm kind of misstating, but like you go to law school, to your point, you can, it's a big expense, right? And it's a big time
Mhm.
commitment, but yet you might not be want to be a career lawyer, right? You work for a little bit, but there might be other avenues you want to do. Speak to how that's still okay. Go to law school, you can get a law degree, but still you don't have to be a trial attorney or work at a big firm. There's still value to that degree and other things you do, right?
Absolutely. I think let's pull the curtain back a little bit. I think anytime we ever say out in the community, "Oh, my name is Jared," and they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" I often say I'm a recovering lawyer. But from there, if you tell them like, "Hey, I got a law degree. This is what I
Mhm.
am," there's an automatic kind of respect for what you do.
Totally.
You've literally spent a ton of money for 3 years on the hope that you pass one exam.
Mhm.
Right? And
Right.
so it's a little crazy if you think about it. And so you have to have passion, you have to have perseverance, you have to have determination to go do all of that. And I think because of what's required versus like being a real estate agent, for example, you just go take the test and
Mhm.
anybody can sell a house. Here you got to actually study, you got to go through it. It's a time commitment that's really long. I think there's this kind of respect automatically that you get it. And then outside of that, a lot of people want different ways to think about business. And there's a I think somewhat a misnomer about, oh, attorneys know a lot about business. It's actually the opposite. Most attorneys don't know a lot about business. And so if you're able to change the way you think and take a business approach as a lawyer, you're actually able to excel faster and farther than most people. Now, look, there's a lot of great lawyers out there who understand business over time, whether it's a trial attorney, a corporate transactional attorney, labor and employment, whatever the case is, tax, et cetera. But it's just a different way to think. And so you don't have to be a big time partner to use your law degree. You can use it in a multitude of fashions.
So how did that transition work for you, right? You mentioned waiting, decided if you want to get the LLM for tax,
Hmm.
at the same time, kind of preparing for the bar, passing the bar, kind of speed us through those first jobs that then ultimately led you to your transition of saying you want to be a businessman, an entrepreneur, and start your own companies.
Yeah, sure. So it first started where I got a call from a friend of mine named Wayne Tucker, and Wayne was going to take this job from KPMG. And he said, I got another job. I'm not going to do it. Jared, do you mind if I tell him about you? And I said, absolutely. That'd be great. And so he told him about me. I got a call from Brian Cumberland at KPMG, and he said, "Hey, we got this position. Do you want to come in and interview for it?" And I was like, "Yeah, this would be great. This is the reason why I didn't go pursue my LLM
Yeah.
to have a job like this." And so literally met with him that day, got an offer that night, and started, I think, that following Monday, and that was in the comp and benefits, division of KPMG. Now, what I didn't know at the time was here I am, that my girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Harmon was her name. We've been dating, I've been wanting to get married. I now got a steady job, making some money,
Mhm.
and we get engaged, and literally 2 days, this is probably about 6 months in to KPMG, maybe 9 months in.
Mhm.
Get engaged. Two days later, after being engaged, the DOJ came back and said, "Hey, KPMG, you got to dissolve your comp and benefits group."
Eeks.
And so had noticed that I literally had 6 months to find another job. And so at that point, I went home and told Jennifer, I'm like, "Hey, I got some exciting news," and she's like, "Okay, great, let's go celebrate." And I'm like, "No, why don't we cook dinner? Let's make some pasta because it's cheap."
Yep.
And she's like, okay. And she's like, well, should we open up some wine? And I said, absolutely. Because at the time I'm thinking, I don't want you to change your answer.
Right.
So I get over to her house. We make some pasta. We open up some wine. I keep pouring her a bunch of wine to make sure she doesn't change her answer. And she goes, what's this good news that you're hearing about? I said, well, I got 6 months to find another job. And she's like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, it's totally good news." And she's like, "How is this good news?" And like, I'll go, "Well, it's really a great opportunity." And she's like, "Explain this to me." And I said, "Well, everybody that's been in this situation, as long as you control what you can't control, you'll never end up in a worse situation." And she's like, "You're nuts." And I'm like, "Just watch. We'll be fine."
Yeah.
And by the way, she didn't change her answer. She still said yes.
That's
And
good.
so literally from there, I got a note from Beth Lee, who at the time was at the SMU admissions or career services office at the law school. And she said, "Hey, I have some friends at Baker Botts. They're looking for a tax attorney.
Mm.
Just so happened to be." And put my name in and got a job at Baker Botts. And so so everything that I wanted, a big law
Yeah.
firm, everything else, I kinda took a different approach, landed at Baker Botts, had almost a year of experience to bring into that position,
Mhm.
and then stayed there, did a little stint from Baker Botts up until 2009. Went down to Houston to Fulbright. Unfortunately, got caught up in the recession, as
Mhm.
people like to say, from there. And I was last one in and first one out. And the moment that occurred, I called Jen and said, who we were married now at the time, had a baby named Harmon, who was less than a year old. And I said, "Hey, I got a great opportunity I want to talk to you about." And
He's
she's
like,
like,
"Not
"Okay."
this again."
Now she was in Colorado with her parents and her son. And I said, "Hey, when you get back, do you mind if your parents watch Harmon? So
Yeah.
I got a great opportunity I want to talk to you about." She hangs up, literally calls me back 10 minutes later. She goes, "Did you get let go?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Okay, sounds good." And that was kind of it. So, hightailed it back to Dallas, became a general counsel of an insurance agency here in Dallas called Apex Global Partners.
Mhm.
They were a group that bought an old company called Benefit Partners. The Hunt family invested in it. I got brought in, was their GC, and then helped grow that company. And then when they sold to what's now MMA, or it was MHBT, now MMA, I said, I'm going to go start my own law firm because I also want to start a couple of other companies.
Yeah.
So at that point, told my wife and I said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about an opportunity." And she's like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm going to start my own firm." She's like, "You're nuts." And I'm like, "I know, but I think I got it because I was doing benefits. And at the time, this was right when ACA came out, the healthcare reform. And so I knew everything there was about it. I dug in because again, I could see kind of the patterns
Right.
going throughout ACA because it was, at the end of the day, it was all tax stuff.
Yeah.
So I started my own firm at the same time, got involved in a couple of startup companies. One was Medical Home Exchange, which converted to Output Health, and then a couple other companies as well. But one of the things I've learned all through that was, one, I failed successfully,
Mhm.
learned a lot of lessons, had a really good law practice. I actually had 5 attorneys with me and an assistant, did really well. And then about 7.5 years ago, almost, yeah, 7.5 years ago, started this company called WorkShield.
So you see this kind of trend going, right? In terms of kind of the ACA tax, all this kind of work and benefits kind of world coming together. And you mentioned it kind of aligning. And then at the same time, it sounds like you like to have the kind of control of being able to either to run your
Yeah.
own practice. Is that kind of how you envision a structure going? Like, okay, I can at the top have this backstop of my law firm that you're an attorney, you'll always find work there, you have a tax specialty, but at the same time, I can scratch this kind of entrepreneur itch and say maybe I can find some categories in this space that are emerging and build out my own companies, or is that kind of how the puzzle worked together in your mind, or was it just kind of, hey, the opportunities arose and you decided to take them, and having that flexibility was impactful?
Well, I think 3 things. Number 1, flexibility was key, right? You couldn't do what I was doing at a big firm.
Mm-mm.
No way. Number 2, I always was trying to create a base level of income, and then how do I create other
Mhm.
avenues of revenue, other avenues of income? And so, with that in mind, I knew my law practice was doing well. And at the same time, the flexibility freed me up to join some other opportunistic people to say, "Hey, let's go try to solve healthcare. Let's start this company because I've seen all the healthcare stuff and how messed up it was.
Yeah.
So how do we solve it?" So was able to use some business learnings into that as well, and then partner with a few people. One today is a really good friend of mine, from there. And then as opportunity arose, being able to have the flexibility to say, "Oh, yeah, this looks pretty fun. Let me see if I can go change the world or see what I can do and maybe create another revenue stream." And so that's always been kind of my mantra of realizing I probably don't work well with someone telling me what to do.
Mm.
And it took a while to figure it out. But at the same time, I don't mind the pressure of providing for a family at the
Yeah.
time, creating revenue, and creating opportunity.
So you had the backstop of a law firm.
Mhm.
You mentioned a couple others that started and get going, but eventually WorkShield seems to be taking the time. building the revenue. Tell us a little bit about how that idea or kind of what the the solution that you guys were trying to fix with WorkShield and kind of how it began to grow and those building blocks that led it to where it ultimately is your full-time uh effort right
Yeah.
now.
So it was really a convergence of, at the time, a lot of things coming together. And so you got to understand at the time, I had my law firm, I had a couple of other things I was trying to do. And then I got this email from a client of mine of my law firm. She was in
Mhm,
Chicago, actually, two clients of mine in Chicago, and said, "Hey, how do we solve basically the Me Too problem?"
mhm, mhm,
Right. And so harassment, discrimination, and there was this one solution out in California that they were looking at, and I'm like, "It's horrible. Like, you're going to have a lot of P&L on your books
mhm.
once you implement it." It was almost like a glorified HRA, health reimbursement account, but for sexual harassment. And so I said, let me think about it." And it just fascinated me about, okay, how do we solve this problem? And so as I started going around and doing research and asking friends, asking females, like, how have you done this? But also thinking about my own clients that I go look in their handbook because I'm the one that helped draft it. And
Mhm,
it literally every company had the same process that said, if you've been harassed or discriminated against, go to your manager,
mhm.
go to your supervisor, go to HR, or go call that anonymous hotline, which then puts it right back on the manager, supervisor, or HR. And so when that dawned on me, I started looking into the data. And the data basically showed, look, 75 plus percent of the people don't report when these issues occur. But yet, if you go ask all of the executives, hey, I want to solve this problem. I just don't know about it. I want to be able to address these issues. I just don't find out about it till I got a lawsuit. It's those managers and supervisors down below that keeps pressing it down. And so at that point, I said, okay, that's when the light bulb went off. And I said, well, what if we were able to create our own technology, our own platform where people can go report, but instead of putting the onus back on the employer, which has been done for the last 50, 60 years, what if we actually did the investigation? Because that's the hardest part.
Right,
And what if we were able to not only create attorney client privilege with that investigation and also create some protections for the employer, but what if we could do that whole investigation in less than a week? And more importantly, what if we could resolve it with $0? And so that was the idea behind WorkShield. And and at that point, just to put a pause in it, one of this resounding theme kept coming back and back and back. And the resounding theme was this theory based on the role of apology. And so, if you remember Professor Schumann, he taught torts
mhm,
in my 1L year, and he talked about this role of apology, which was this study that was done where people went out and asked all of these plaintiffs that won 50, 100 million plus dollar settlements and said, "You just won all this money. Is this what you wanted?" And 99% of them said, "No, all I wanted was an apology." And that stuck with me, obviously, for a very long time. And it kept coming back. And I said, I think there's this theory called the role of being heard. And the idea was at the time of making WorkShield was if we could actually hear all the voices and actually hear them out and ensure a clear path to resolution, I think we can stop all the litigation from that. And so that's what I call the role of being heard. Well, fast forward to today, 7.5 years later, we have almost 200,000 employee lives on our platform today. We have countries all over the country, Canada, Mexico. We even have the North Pole of Alaska, which is kind of fun, even some companies in Europe. And for all the companies that have rolled out WorkShield, guess what? Zero litigation, $0, and our average turnaround time from intake to investigation to resolution is less than 5 days, which is pretty cool.
that's incredible.
And so this theory of being heard is now a reality of the role of being heard, where if you can actually listen to your employees, give them a safe space to go report, provide the data, the analytics, plus also the service and the technology behind it, we can stop all that litigation. And so it's this nice convergence of law degree, law aptitude, business, being out by myself, understanding HR from my time as general counsel as an insurance agency to actually managing employee benefits, HR matters, employment matters. It all kind of happened all at once. And that's where the opportunity came knocking and I stepped through that door.
Incredible, yeah. Seems like the perfect collection of historical work experiences that led to this. So you explained the issue and how it came to you very well, and I think anyone can understand that case and how that needed to be improved. What were challenges for you as you had, like you say, the vision came in front of you, you saw how it needed to be built and created. What challenges kinda happened in the first stage of you guys getting off the ground? Was it tech? I mean, we haven't talked much about the software and the tech side of what you guys do, and leading up to this part, it didn't sound like there was a lot of that in your background, or was it, getting buy-in from your clients? What were some of the early challenges that you guys had to overcome?
You know, I think number one, starting a company by yourself is hard no matter what, whether it's your own law firm or anything. Here, I was fortunate enough because of starting my own law firm, I learned some of those challenges. I failed frequently, right? Starting a couple of other startups and having some moderate success in one, some complete failures in the other. I learned that, hey, if you're gonna go do something, it's better just to make sure you do it yourself, and then let's get some revenue coming in the door, and then you're able to go out and maybe get some investors and learn from those mistakes. And so, at the time WorkShield was started, actually some of our challenges really came down to, okay, we've started this company, we got a couple of clients. Of course, there's no profit because everything's going back into the
Mhm.
company. I remember one of the hardest decisions to make was we needed to make sure that the WorkShield name got out. And so the best way to do that was with a PR firm to get some publicity, some notoriety. And I remember I got the proposal to work with this one firm here in Dallas, and it was like $4,000 a month. It was more than our mortgage,
Yeah.
right? And so, and at the time, I have a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old. I got a 10-year-old that's going to private school. I got an 8-year-old that's going to private school as well. Wife's not working, and my law firm is really the one that's kind of
Yeah.
floating everything. So we're putting everything into this company, and we just kind of make the decision like it's now or never. And so made that decision, and funded it, and then it was just late nights, early mornings, making sure I still answer my clients' questions on the law firm stuff, while at the same time trying to grow the company. So that was kind of the hardest part is juggling
Mhm.
some of that, but I think also it was more about making sure that we had a defined message of what we do, how we do, and why it's better than what's been out there for 50 years. And so, and then also taking a more what I call benefits approach to this problem from the finance side of things. And so I think that was kind of the hardest part of just kind of making sure that people understood it because most people are like, oh, I got NavX or I got a hotline already. Well, yeah, and then they say, "Well, nobody reports." So it's a little bit of getting the data out there and getting the information. That was probably the hardest part, which was the reason why we had to spend that money to make sure people knew about WorkShield and how we're different.
So what was, one of the success stories where you knew, "Hey, WorkShield's not only gonna work as a business, but it's making a difference for" I mean, twofold, right? You're helping a company that needs to
Yeah.
be a steward of its and people, but then you're also helping those, like you mentioned, be heard, and protect them. So if you have, I'm sure there's plenty, but what was one that really
Mhm.
stuck with you or still sticks with you that you kind of knew, hey, I'm hitting on all these buckets that make me really proud of what I created?
Well, I think a couple things. There's one client specifically, and I remember the day I remember exactly where I was when I found out we got our first large client,
Mhm.
and they had about 1,000 employees. Now, at the time, we're charging $2 per employee per month. So here I am, so excited, like, yes, I just made $2,000 a
Yeah,
month, right? 24,000 a year. Now, granted, we already had some revenue, but this
yeah,
was our first large client.
right.
And that client looked at their data for the 3 years prior to Workshield coming on, because 'cause they're like, "Hey, we're gonna track and monitor this." I'm like, "Feel free,"
Mhm.
right? Put my money where my mouth is. And the 3 years prior to putting us on, they had spent like $400,000 in settlements and attorney's fees, okay? They had roughly 142 incidents and I think 30 EEOC charges,
Mhm.
okay? So pretty good data,
Yeah,
right? To base, am I successful off of this?
far more
Now,
than 24 grand.
yeah, exactly. Now, let's fast forward. So that was, they've been with us for 6 years. Okay. So 6 years later, zero EEOC charges and no attorney's fees or settlements ever. And so it's pretty easy. And their turnover's gone down,
Right.
more importantly. And so when you see data and stats like that comparatively, and even during COVID, this company, the owner of this company said, "Hey, we're like everybody else, but number one, don't get rid of Workshield because this is when we need them the most to make sure voices are heard, everything else." I think that's when it hit me like, "Hey, I think we got something here." And we were able to grow and succeed. And I still get chills about it.
That's
It's
awesome.
fun.
You should. I mean, so as we wrap up here, we'll talk a little bit about the future and where you guys are going. You mentioned 200,000 lives, I imagine, is the goal to hit a million. You guys have been backed by
Yeah.
some private equity investment. Kind of where do you want to take WorkShield in the short term and long term future?
Well, I think number one, I get asked this question a lot, like, where do we want to go? And my first answer is always, we got to execute,
Hmm.
right? We have a strategy and we have a plan, but it doesn't mean jack if we don't execute. And so we literally want to execute on being customer obsessed, making sure our clients get the great service that they deserve,
Hmm.
making sure employees have their voices heard, and making sure our investigations are done really well, and making sure our technology is better than any other technology that's out there. And if we can execute on all of that, then I think we're set up to win. Now, where we want to go from that as we're executing is, look, yeah, I want to get to a large amount of employee lives on our platform. I think 500,000 is really close around the corner, and I think 1,000,000 lives is going to be a fun avenue to get to. And I often tell even my investors to say, "Hey, when we're at a 500,000 lives, like, we're gonna have some fun problems to figure out,"
Hmm.
right? Because then you're looking at, okay, you're really good on the EBITDA, your profit margins are awesome. People are gonna wonder, like, how are you changing this landscape? There's a few things we're working on that's really gonna change the insurance industry as well,
Hmm.
with our data and our analytics and what we're able to provide. I think the future is really bright. I think there's a lot of cool things we're working on. Our technology is just getting better and better. And one of the things people often ask is, how are you going to implement AI into this process? And I think some people are shocked initially when I say, well, number one, AI will never replace the human voice. It just won't. The human feeling, the human connection, if you feel like you've been harassed and you need to talk to somebody, a robot's not going to be able to answer your questions or understand your feelings or understand the pain in your voice or the scaredness in your voice or that ear to listen. And so that's where I think as we deal with human emotions and a human environment inside the workplace, that's one thing we'll never get rid of. Now, AI is cool. We could do a lot of things with it, which we are currently, but it's never going to replace that human voice. But there, where we're headed, yeah, 1,000,000 lives is great, but there's a lot more lives out there than that. But we're never going to get there if we don't execute.
Jared, this has been fun, and I really appreciate the transparency and the enthusiasm as you speak about WorkShield. So thank you for
Yeah, thank you.
sharing all you've done and where you're going. And we're excited to check in with you and wherever that year mark is that gets you to 500,000 to a million lives.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to call you SMU Deadman Law alumni. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
We'll talk soon. Thanks, Jared. Thank you to our incredible sponsors, Security National Bank, Hilltop Property Tax, Mignon Steakhouse, Sound of a Rose Podcast, and the SMU's Cox School of Business for making this all possible.